They checked his ID very carefully, asked a lot of questions, and even called security. All of this happened before they realized they were about to refuse service to the one person who had the power to fire them all. Keanu Reeves had been thinking about this idea for a long time. At first, it was just a small thought, easy to ignore. But the more he thought about it, the more it bothered him. Keanu had started Grayson Trust Bank from nothing. This was his bank, his legacy. He wasn't just some fancy boss sitting in a big office, looking at the city from above. He had spent years making sure his bank was different. It was supposed to be fair to everyone. But was it really? That was the question that kept him awake at night. He had heard whispers before, stories about some customers not being treated well at certain branches. Nothing too obvious, nothing big enough to make the news, just small things that made him wonder. Friends had mentioned it. People he trusted had said something in passing. At first he ignored it. After all, his bank had rules against treating customers unfairly. They had policies about kindness, respect, and equality. But words on a piece of paper didn't change the world. Actions did. And Keanu needed to see for himself. Not as a CEO. Not as the boss. But as a regular person. So today, Keanu dressed in simple clothes. A hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. No fancy suit, no polished shoes, no air of importance. Just an ordinary guy walking into one of his own bank branches. He wanted to know the truth. The bank he picked was in Indianapolis, Indiana. He had opened this branch himself 3 years ago. He had cut the ribbon, shaken hands with the manager, and given a speech about trust. Now he was walking in as just another customer. The glass door slid open and he stepped inside. The bank smelled like new paper and strong air freshener. It was a quiet afternoon. A few people stood in line. Some sat in chairs waiting. A teller at the far end was counting money in a drawer. Keanu adjusted the bag on his shoulder and stepped up to the counter. A young woman was working there. She had pale skin and dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. She glanced at him but didn't say hello. No smile. No greeting. Just a quick look at him before she turned back to her computer screen. Keanu cleared his throat. "Hi, I'd like to take out some money." The teller still didn't look at him. Instead, she grabbed a clipboard and slid it across the counter. "Fill this out," she said. The form was simple. Name, account number, how much money he wanted to take out. Keanu filled it out quickly. He wrote down $5,000. Not a huge amount, but enough for them to check his ID. He handed back the clipboard. That's when everything changed. The teller looked at the form, then at his ID. Her eyebrows scrunched together. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The air around them felt different now. Something was off. Keanu waited, giving her a chance. Maybe she was just being careful. She looked up at his face again. Then she hesitated. Just for a second too long. And in that moment, Keanu knew. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about security. This was about who they thought he was. The teller's fingers hovered over the keyboard, like she wasn't sure what to do. Then she slowly placed his ID back on the counter. But instead of helping him, she said, I'll be right back. She grabbed his ID and walked away, disappearing behind a door marked Manager's Office. Keanu took a slow breath and tapped his fingers on the counter. He had expected to be treated differently today. But not like this. And something told him this wasn't over yet. He leaned against the counter and watched the teller disappear behind the frosted glass door. The energy in the bank had changed. It wasn't silent, but it felt heavier. Keanu glanced around. A man in a wrinkled suit stood 2 spots behind him. He looked like he had come straight from work. Earlier, when he stepped up to the counter, the teller greeted him right away. Another customer, an older woman in a floral dress, was chatting with a different teller. She smiled. They laughed together. No hesitation. No extra questions. Keanu turned back to the counter, his jaw tightening. He had been standing there for nearly 5 minutes now. Waiting for an explanation. Finally, the door opened. The teller was back, but she wasn't alone. A middle-aged man walked beside her. He was stocky, bald, and wore rimless glasses. His name tag said, Benjamin Caldwell. He was the branch manager. Benjamin smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was too stiff, too controlled. He wasn't here to help. He was here to judge. He stopped at the counter and nodded at Keanu. "Good afternoon, sir. I understand you're trying to withdraw some money?" Keanu nodded. "That's right, $5,000. My account. My ID." Benjamin looked at the teller, then back at Keanu. "May I see your identification?" Keanu took a slow breath. "I already gave it to her." Benjamin didn't react. He simply picked up the ID and held it up to the light. He studied it for a long moment, then looked back at Keanu. Mr. Reeves, is this your first time banking with us? Keanu's stomach tightened. He understood what Benjamin really meant. Do you belong here? Keanu's voice was sharper now. I've banked here since this branch opened. Benjamin nodded slowly like he was thinking. And you said you're withdrawing $5,000? Keanu's patience was running out. That's what I wrote down. The bank lobby was even quieter now. A few people had started watching. They could sense something was wrong. Benjamin turned the ID over in his fingers, then asked, "And what do you do for work, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu let out a short laugh. Not because it was funny, but because he couldn't believe this was happening. He tilted his head, looking Benjamin in the eyes. "I work in finance." Benjamin's smile was fake. "Oh, what kind?" Keanu let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then finally he said, "Banking." Benjamin hesitated for just a second. But instead of stopping, he kept going. "I see," Benjamin said. "And this is a personal account, correct? Not a business one?" Keanu crossed his arms. "That's what it says on the form." Benjamin glanced at the teller again. More hesitation. Then finally he placed the ID back on the counter. "I'm sorry, but we won't be able to process this withdrawal at this time." Keanu blinked. "What?" He straightened. "Excuse me?" Benjamin kept his face neutral. "We're unable to verify the transaction." Keanu felt his heart start to race. "What do you mean? You have my ID. You have my account number. What else do you need?" Benjamin clasped his hands together. "It's just a precaution. We take security very seriously." Security. That was the word people used when they didn't want to say the truth. Keanu's fingers curled into fists. This wasn't about fraud. This wasn't about following the rules. This was something else. And he wasn't leaving. Not until he got an answer. Mr. Reeves wanted to take out some money from his bank. It wasn't a huge amount, just $5,000, which was a small part of the money he had in his account. But the bank manager, Benjamin, was making things hard for him. Benjamin looked at me. Reeves said, "Big cash withdrawals need extra security steps. We just need to confirm a few things before we can give you the money." Mr. Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Benjamin hesitated for a moment. Then he said, "Just some simple account questions. Can you tell me the least amount of money that was deposited into this account?" Mr. Reeves stared at Benjamin. That was not a normal question. He knew that banks usually asked security questions, but not this one. Not when someone was taking out money with a valid ID. He could feel that something wasn't right. Was this a test? Was Benjamin trying to see if he really had access to his own money? Mr. Reeves' fingers tapped on the smooth, cold counter. "I don't have that number memorized," he said calmly. "But if you check my account like you do for other customers, you will see all my deposits." Benjamin gave a small, fake smile. "Of course. But for security reasons, we need to make sure the account owner knows certain details." Mr. Reeves clenched his jaw. "I just gave you my ID." Benjamin did not look worried. "I understand. But you'd be surprised how often people bring fake IDs." "Fake." Mr. Reeves took a slow breath to stay calm. "I'm not asking for $1 million. It's just $5,000. A tiny bit of what I have in my account. I followed all the rules. So tell me, what's the real problem here?" Benjamin's face didn't change. "We are just doing our job, Mr. Reeves." Mr. Reeves was getting tired of this game. He looked Benjamin in the eye. "Benjamin," he said slowly, "if I was a man in a fancy suit, would you be asking me these questions?" For just a second, something flickered across Benjamin's face. A tiny reaction. But then his usual fake polite look returned. "This isn't about how you look," Benjamin said smoothly. "It's about bank policy." Mr. Reeves let out a short, humorless laugh. "Is that so?" Benjamin tilted his head like he was thinking. "Would you like to try another way to verify your identity? Maybe a utility bill? A second form of ID?" Mr. Reeves blinked. "A utility bill? You want me to bring another ID? Just to take out my own money? In the bank where my money is already sitting?" Benjamin didn't even blink. Mr. Reeves shook his head, tapping his fingers on the counter. "Okay, let's do this a different way. Pull up my account." Benjamin hesitated. "You have my name," Mr. Reeves continued. "You have my ID. If you check my records, you'll see I've been a customer since the beginning. I helped open this branch. I probably signed some of your training documents." Benjamin said nothing. Mr. Reeves leaned in just a little and lowered his voice. "You might want to check that before you make this worse." Benjamin pressed his lips together. The bank teller next to him shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Reeves wondered if Benjamin would finally give in, apologize, and just let him take his money. Instead, Benjamin did something shocking. He reached under the counter, pressed a hidden button, and called over security. A tall security guard with broad shoulders stepped out from the back. His hand rested near his belt. His face was serious, unreadable. But Mr. Reeves knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just about security. Benjamin was making a statement. He was trying to make Mr. Reeves look like a problem. Mr. Reeves took a slow breath. He had seen people like Benjamin before. The kind who didn't expect to be questioned. The kind who enjoyed reminding certain people who had power. But Mr. Reeves wasn't going to play this game. He lifted his chin slightly and locked eyes with Benjamin. "You're really doing this?" Benjamin kept his fake polite face. "We just want to make sure all customers have a smooth experience." "A smooth experience?" Mr. Reeves repeated, his voice calm but sharp, as if he was the one making trouble. The security guard took a step closer. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice even. Mr. Reeves turned to him, his body relaxed. "That depends," he said coolly. "Are you here to help me get my money or just to kick me out?" The guard hesitated. He looked at Benjamin, who gave him a small nod. Mr. Reeves let out a short laugh and shook his head. "Wow, so this is how it is." Benjamin sighed as if he was the one being bothered. "Mr. Reeves, if you come back with more documents, we'd be happy to help you. But right now..." "No," Mr. Reeves cut him off. "You know what's funny, Benjamin? I just watched you give that man his money 10 minutes ago. No extra security. No manager. No calling security." Benjamin's face tightened slightly. Mr. Reeves leaned on the counter and lowered his voice. "I wonder what's different about me." The air in the room changed. The bank teller looked down, avoiding eye contact. The security guard shifted his stance, looking less sure. But Benjamin? Benjamin still stood firm. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Mr. Reeves," Benjamin said flatly. "But our policies exist for a reason." Mr. Reeves held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached into his bag. Benjamin's eyes flickered with nervousness. The security guard's hand moved slightly toward his belt. Mr. Reeves didn't blink. He pulled out his phone and hit the record button. A few customers turned their heads, sensing something was happening. Benjamin's face changed slightly. "Mr. Reeves, there's no need. I just want to make sure I get this on camera," Mr. Reeves said smoothly. "You are refusing to let me take out my own money, even though I showed you my government ID. Other customers don't have to do this extra verification. Just me." Benjamin's jaw tightened. Mr. Reeves turned his phone slightly to capture the security guard. "And you were called over for what reason exactly?" The guard hesitated. He looked at Benjamin, waiting for an answer. Benjamin said nothing. Keanu didn't push the phone away. Instead, he grabbed his ID from the counter quickly, like he wanted to have the last move. That was it. That was the moment Keanu smiled. Benjamin had no idea who he was dealing with. In just a few seconds, he was going to regret everything. Keanu let the moment stretch. He let Benjamin feel the weight of his mistake. Benjamin grabbed the ID like he had the power to decide what happened next, as if this was his bank. But it wasn't. It was Keanu's bank. Keanu tilted his phone slightly, making sure the camera captured everything. Benjamin's face, the security guard, the tension in the air. Then in a calm voice he spoke. "Benjamin, let me introduce myself properly." Benjamin's face changed. For the first time he looked unsure. Keanu took his ID back, pulling it from Benjamin's fingers easily. He flipped it over and tapped on the name printed there. "Do you see this? This isn't just any customer ID." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You're looking at the founder and CEO of Grayson Trust." The bank lobby fell silent. The security guard shifted. The bank teller's face turned pale. Even the customers standing nearby, who were pretending not to listen, suddenly stiffened. Benjamin, for the first time, had lost control. His throat moved as he swallowed. His lips parted like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Keanu took a slow step back and put his ID into his bag. "I built this bank," he said. "From nothing. I signed the papers to open this branch. I approved the hiring budget that got you this job." Benjamin's hands curled into fists. His whole attitude changed. No more fake politeness. Now there was only panic. Keanu gave him a small, tight-lipped smile. "And today I walked in as just another customer, just to see what would happen." He tilted his head slightly. "You know what happened, Benjamin?" Benjamin didn't answer. He couldn't. Keanu lowered his voice. "I was refused service. Lied to. Humiliated. Treated like I didn't belong. Benjamin finally blinked. His mouth opened. Mr. Reeves? Keanu held up a hand. No. You had your chance to talk. Now you listen. He turned slightly, making sure everyone in the lobby could hear him. If I were standing here in a fancy suit, if I looked like what you expect a CEO to look like, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. Benjamin's eyes darted to the security guard, looking for help. The guard said nothing. The teller was staring down at her register, looking like she wanted to disappear. Keanu took a slow breath and raised his phone again. Benjamin, I have a question for you, he said calmly. Should I send this video to corporate, or should I handle this right now? Benjamin's face went pale. He opened and closed his mouth twice before he finally found his voice. Mr. Reeves, I'm so sorry. This was just a misunderstanding. Keanu raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding? Benjamin nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. I can process your withdrawal right away. Keanu let that sit in the air for a second. Then he let out a soft laugh. Benjamin, he said, shaking his head, you and I both know it's too late for that. Benjamin's face turned gray. He knew Keanu was right, and what happened next was out of his hands. But one thing was certain. His day was about to get much worse. The smooth, confident manager from 5 minutes ago now stood stiff and nervous, gripping the counter like it was the only thing holding him up. The security guard, who had been called to escort Keanu out, shifted awkwardly, eyes flicking between Benjamin and Keanu as if silently asking, Am I still supposed to be here? Keanu exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the counter. Let me make sure I understand, Benjamin, he said, his voice steady. A few minutes ago, my ID wasn't enough. My name wasn't enough. My account history wasn't enough. You needed more proof. You needed extra verification. And now that you know who I am. He let the pause stretch, watching Benjamin squirm. Now, suddenly, none of that matters anymore? Benjamin swallowed hard, his Adam's apple moving. Mr. Reeves, I deeply regret how this happened. I promise this was not intentional. Keanu let out a humorless laugh. Not intentional? He repeated. Benjamin, do you think I'm stupid? Benjamin's eyes widened slightly, but he stayed silent. You knew exactly what you were doing, Keanu continued, his voice calm but sharp. You looked at me and in your mind, you decided I wasn't supposed to be here. You put up every roadblock you could to make sure I knew it. Benjamin shook his head quickly. Mr. Reeves, I swear that's not what happened. Keanu held up a hand, cutting him off. No, he said, his voice firm as steel. I don't want to hear any more fake apologies. Because let's be honest, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. Benjamin's jaw tightened. The customers in the lobby were no longer pretending not to listen. The air was thick with tension. Everyone felt it. The teller who had started this whole mess stood frozen, staring at the register, refusing to look up. And Keanu was just getting started. He turned to the security guard. You were called over to escort me out, correct? The guard hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Yes, sir. That was my understanding. Keanu nodded. And now that you know who I am, do you still think that was the right decision? The guard glanced at Benjamin, then back at Keanu. His stance shifted slightly. No, sir. I was just following orders. Keanu studied him for a moment. He knew how this worked. Benjamin would try to pass the blame to everyone else. He'd pretend this was a misunderstanding, try to make it all go away. But this wasn't going away. Keanu reached into his bag and pulled out a business card. Here's what's going to happen, he said, sliding the card across the counter toward Benjamin. You're going to call my office. You're going to schedule a meeting with corporate. And you're going to explain in detail why this happened today. Benjamin's fingers trembled as he picked up the card. Of course, Mr. Reeves. Absolutely. Keanu turned to the security guard. I appreciate you doing your job when called, he said evenly, but be more careful about when to step in. If a customer isn't being disruptive, intimidation shouldn't be the first step. The guard gave a small nod. Understood, sir. Keanu turned to the teller, who still refused to look up. You saw my ID. You saw my account. And still you dismissed me, he said. I was just following protocol, the teller stammered. Then ask yourself why that protocol only seems to apply to people like me. Silence. Everyone was watching. This is my bank, Keanu said. And this is the last time this happens. He stopped recording. Benjamin? Benjamin tensed. Start looking for a new job. By morning he was gone. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.